Hello, this is David Mandell, host of the podcast. Thanks for joining. By now, hopefully everybody watching or listening knows we're in the middle of the summer 2025 Rewind series, so what we call our Summer Rewind program. And what we do, because we're on an academic setting where it's all new episodes from basically September to June, and then from June to September in the summer, we don't come out with new episodes. What I do is I look back on the prior, not season 5, which wrapped this June, but season 4 and season 3, so a year ago and 2 years ago, and pick out episodes that I think are really valuable, are evergreen, or just as valuable today as when they came out. And the last two we did over the last 2 weeks ago and 4 weeks ago were on this topic of real estate. I wanted to put those two together. Now we're returning to a doctorpreneurship type episode. This is with an orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Scott Sigman, and he talks about his entrepreneurial ventures, which include a bunch of social media and work with industry and a podcast himself and a bunch of other things that he's doing that if you're have an entrepreneurial streak in you, if you want to build up a following, if you're interested in working with industry, you'll learn from Scott, and he's certainly a dynamic and interesting and fun guest. So this is called Varied Ventures, an orthopedic podcast, and Follow the Fro. That is a hashtag Follow the Fro with Dr. Scott Sigman. So it was originally episode 3.5 in season 3, and I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast, where we talk to doctors like you about their real-world lessons in financial matters and hear from industry experts who can impact your personal bottom line. The host of our podcast is David Mandell. David is an attorney, OJM Group partner, and author of more than a dozen books on wealth planning for physicians. Now, let's turn the mic over to David.
Hello, this is Dave Mandell, host of the program. We've got a great guest today, one who's got a lot of interesting things going on, and I think you'll be really entertained and also learn some things. So let me tell you about Dr. Scott Sigman. I'll tell you his bio, which is I've kind of cut down a bit. He's got a lot of good things going on, but of course, in the show notes, we'll link to his full bio as well as some links to some of the cool stuff he's doing. So let me tell you about Dr. Scott Sigman. He's a board-certified orthopedic surgeon with Orthopedic Surgical Associates of Lowell. That's in the Boston area. Since 1996, in addition to his practice duties, he served as team physician for the U.S. ski jump team and has served for the last 20 years as team physician at UMass Lowell and is past chief of orthopedics at Lowell General Hospital. He graduated cum laude from in biology from Tufts University, where he played varsity lacrosse. That's very cool. I have a lot of lacrosse players in my early life. President of the Alpha Epsilon Pi fraternity. He then received his medical degree cum laude from University of Maryland School of Medicine and was member of the prestigious Alpha Omega Alpha Medical Honor Society. After graduating, he completed his postgraduate internship at general surgery at St. Agnes Hospital, followed by residency in orthopedic surgery back at Tufts Medical Center. And then he also did a fellowship in sports medicine at the Curl and Job Orthopedic Clinic in Los Angeles. In addition to his clinical work, Scott's involved with a number of entrepreneurial activities, from work within the industry, laser centers. He's a podcast host on something called The Ortho Show. So this is two hosts going at it here. He has a bunch of other social media content, which is really very cool, and more. And all of that we'll touch on in this episode. So with all of that, Scott, welcome to the program.
Hey, Dave, from one podcaster to another. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Yes. And you've had some great guests on yours that I recognize some of the names on there. So that's terrific. So tell us about you first. Where'd you grow up? What made you become a physician? What, gravitated you into orthopedics?
Yeah, I always like to describe myself as, the original opioid-sparing orthopedic surgeon, healer of knees and shoulders left and right, hashtag Follow the Fro, host of the Ortho Show, and chief medical officer and founder of orthopedic laser centers. In 10th grade, I twisted my knee. had significant knee pain, and went and saw Larry Becker and Jerry Reichmeister, who were the fathers of two of my high school classmates. And they were both sports medicine orthopedic surgeons. And Larry Becker had been a captain of Johns Hopkins lacrosse. So he was sort of this larger than life guy. I knew that the families had done well and the kids were doing well. And I was like, looked up to this guy because I was the captain of lacrosse and the football team. My father was a chemical engineer from MIT, so I was kind of smart. And I was like, hey, I can do this smart thing with the sports medicine thing, put it together. And I swear to you, Dave, 10th grade, I decided I'm going to be a sports medicine orthopedic surgeon. And there you go.
Very cool. And not, a good story and not one that's that crazy. I mean, most of the orthopedics and people listening to this know that a lot of times I've asked them and it said, I was an athlete and got hurt. And I said, hey, these people can help folks like me. They might not have been in the same sport, like lacrosse, as you were referring to, but very good. Excellent. So, obviously this podcast, a little different than yours, this has a focus on finance and sort of business and investing and that kind of wealth planning. So as you were coming up in your training, back in those days, did you have a high interest in those areas? Were you reading the Wall Street Journal? Did you have no interest in say, hey, listen, I'm just going to focus on medicine and I'll figure that out once I'm out there? Where were you in that spectrum?
Well, both of my parents were entrepreneurs. My father, as I said, was a chemical engineer from MIT. He got into manufacturing of polyurethane, all these other things, and then eventually opened up a consulting firm in logistics. And so, he started that business when I think it was about 12, 13 years of age. So I got to watch him go through that. My mother was a headhunter, had her own agency. So I got to see her roll through that. And basically, as they were running their businesses, it was open family, discussion that, you need to know about finances, you need to know about this. So my father was always a go-to person for me whenever I had questions once I sort of got out there. But look, it's challenging enough to go to medical school, try to get into a specialty, get there, and then working, 100 hours a week, and then be able to figure out all the financial stuff. So you need help. I always say, look, I'm not asking you, Dave, to do a shoulder replacement, right? And I'm not certainly going to be the one asked to say what investments I should be making in the stock market on any given day. So we rely on one another for expertise.
Yeah, and that's a huge theme in the books I've written and in our podcast, and which is leveraging other people, right? I mean, we can only be so good at so many things. So it doesn't matter what one thing is you're great at, and maybe you can get a second one. You seem to have more than most, but you got to climb anywhere. You got to leverage other people, and it doesn't have to be wealth planning. It could be anything. It could be your hobby. You want to learn from other folks. You mentioned logistics. I think I've mentioned this in a couple of podcasts before, but for those first listening, my job was kind of in medical logistics. My first job, it was driving every day after school and practice to a chiropractic office to pick up x-rays, to bring them home for my father to read and then dictate his radiologist dictate the diagnosis on a cassette. And then I would drive in the morning before school and drop off the cassette. So that's kind of medical logistics, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It was
before Uber. You had something going on there before
Uber, before dictation, before anything digital. I mean, literally audio, cassette tape, like we used to listen to music on.
An analog world, for sure.
Right. So what about your first job out of training? It sounds like a lot of you did training in LA, you did training in Boston, but did you know you were going to stay in Boston? That's where you wanted to be and you just look there? Did you look in different places? Was it clinical? When did you start to look at the financial piece of it in terms of, how much am I going to get paid? Am I going to an expensive area or not? For those young docs who are listening, how did you start to think about making a decision there?
Well, first and foremost, it's got to be about your spouse, right? I mean, the training that we go through is so rigorous and so time consuming that if you do get married, let's say you're in residency or you're going to be getting married, you got to make sure that your wife's going to be happy. So it's got to be in a place. So when we moved to Massachusetts, my wife at the time, her family was from Pittsfield, Massachusetts.
Yep.
So it made a lot of sense. Then you have to decide, what type of practice do you want? Do you want to be in a private practice where you're running your own business? You're going to be able to make your own decisions. You want to go into academics. It's important for you to be able to write papers, be a part of research, but yet you're going to have less control of your financial destiny? Do you want, so there are various options to go through. For me, I knew I wanted to operate on my patients. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. I didn't mind teaching, but I was going to find a different way to teach. And I wanted to be able to have control as an entrepreneurial family. I wanted to make sure that I had control of where I was doing it. And so I joined the private practice in an environment, in an area that was conducive to where my wife had family as well. And it made a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's a pretty coherent way of looking at it. I think, for some folks like you, I'd like to think like me, who had a lot of opportunity, who had a lot of doors open. Sometimes that makes it more difficult because, you come out of Colonel Job, it's like, oh, well, there's all these great opportunities in LA and sunshine out there, and that could be fun. So I think some of the folks listening to this and some of the young docs we work with, they're very well trained. So they need some limiting factors to make a good decision because, nobody wants to have, buyer's remorse, although there is a lot of turnover. We know that, and burnout, right? So, not just talking about orthopedics, talking medicine in general, and I'm actually working with a couple of orthopedic surgeons on maybe a startup that could help docs make some better decisions when they come out. But, that's a discussion for another day. But I think what you said was very succinct, and certainly if you're married, thinking about spouse and harmony, that all plays into wealth management because you don't want to get divorced in any sense, but certainly from a wealth planning point of view, that's never a wise thing to do.
It's also interesting, Dave. I don't mean to interrupt.
No. This is what
as we're talking about these young doctors and the thoughts and the way they work, right? We grew up in this analog world, and what did that mean? So you joined your private practice, you hung up a shingle, you went around and shook some hands with the local doctors in the community, and then you sat back and you waited. And then over a decade or 15 years, you develop critical mass. You develop a very popular practice, and life is good. But the world's very different now, and this is a digital era. And these young doctors, I'm really always amazed sometimes to watch them, and some of the savvy, young physicians in particular, are done with that model. They're not waiting for the senior physician in the practice to retire so they can take over their practice. They are hitting social media. We were taught you can't advertise. That's against the rules when it comes to medicine. But nowadays, the patients are very savvy too, and they look and can identify. So the young doctors that can build up a social media practice early on and generate interest in who you are, whatever your message may be, the best thing that you could possibly do is when you walk into your office, open up the patient door and know that that patient's sitting there because they want to see you. Not because the primary care sent them, not because the senior guy's on vacation this week, but because your message is loud and clear and people are finding you. So I strongly recommend that for the young docs. And even it's never too late, even for us old gray hairs, you can change the way in which you think. If your young guys are doing it, you don't want to get losing out either. You have another 10 years to go in practice. You might want to really consider a social media presence as well.
And we're going to get back to that before we conclude. I mean, he's got this hashtag follow the fro. If you can't see, obviously this is all audio, but you see Scott's got a good head of hair that many of us would be jealous of. But you're echoing something that I think a guest we both had on, Michael Ast from HSS. I saw him speak at another conference I was at on branding, and I had him on the podcast. I think for those listening, I think it's season 1, but it might've been last year. Time is getting away from me, but he did a great job on branding and what people can, you got to build your own brand as a professional, and that gives you flexibility, that gives you power, that gives you security, right? Because people are, like you said, coming to see you. So if that echoed with any of you listeners, find my episode with Michael Ast, AST, and listen to that. He did a terrific job on branding as a doc. So I want to talk about personal finance, then get into some of the entrepreneurial things you're doing. So you had your parents as obviously role models, and then you came out to practice and you started making money. How did you find, you had talked about delegating, you don't try to do everything yourself. How did you try to find a wealth manager or a insurance person or CPA? What was your path? What advice you'd give on that?
Yeah, a great way to start would be to think about, we had a practice consultant. We had someone that came to the practice once a month, and his job was to make sure that everybody was doing okay, nobody was stealing money, and that all of the things were working appropriately. And he was a tremendous asset because he was an established member within the community. He knew the insurance people, he knew the financial advisors, he knew the accountants as well. And I'm not gonna, I've made transitions and changes,
Sure.
since the first day. And it's like anything else, you go and you meet with your doctor, you don't like his
I don't have a
personality, well,
pediatrician anymore, right? So
right, right. Go find another doctor. It's like if this account's not doing what you want, then go find somebody else. But that's a great place to start. Also, your senior partners within your practice as well.
yeah.
They've been around the block a few times. So there's people out there that can provide you, advice and counsel to make sure you're getting good financial advice.
Yeah. And I want to sort of echo or mirror what your comment on this. Obviously, I do, and anybody that knows who's listening knows the books I've been writing for 30 years and all the talks me and my partners do and all the lectures and articles and all the places we write. Because we're in the same boat, right? I didn't want to be put my shingle as a lawyer initially or a wealth manager and just, go play golf and shake hands and get clients in the community. We have 1,500 physicians all around the country. Why? Because of content, right? And so for the docs out there, I think most have realized, even us gray hairs, that you don't have to have the financial advisor next door. You asked me before we got on about a professional who I think you may be friends with or use, who's not in Massachusetts, right? So it's different with orthopedics, although my wife's about to go get a procedure in and out of state, who's a client and friend and someone who's been on, because we want to go to someone we think is great for us, it doesn't have to be next door. So this world translates the same way in my world, right? People want to find the best wealth manager, no matter where they are. Sometimes it's OZM, but it doesn't matter, even if it's somebody else. But starting with folks and networking that way is a good way to do it as well. So I appreciate that. So now let's get into the some of the cool entrepreneurial things you're doing. You mentioned when we talked entrepreneur, which is great. You do a lot of different things. You tell us. You start wherever you want to start.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting for the listeners again. I mean, I love being a doctor. I mean, I really care for my patients, but I've actually at this point, in practice for 25 years. You become a master. People want to work with you, and so you develop relationships outside of your clinical practice. So about 75% of what I do on a given week is taking care of patients, and about 25% is other stuff too.
Okay, interesting.
And so the first thing we'll start with, I think, is probably my passion for opioid-sparing surgery. And obviously, elective surgery became this sort of inadvertent gateway to the opioid crisis and addiction. And we were all part of that. It wasn't because we were bad doctors, but the whole culture of how pain was being managed really got out of control. And so it was about 2014 for me in particular, where I recognized that we needed to do things differently. And so I, sort of partnered up with several different, pharma companies that were doing interesting opioid alternatives. And that sort of led me to the concept of the orthopedic laser centers. I was seeking out concepts and ideas of alternative pain management solutions. And the laser really came to the forefront, did a lot of research, went to Italy on separate occasions and met with the leading laser, scientists in the world. And the basic science and the clinical literature behind laser everywhere that we're in the world other than the United States was incredibly impressive. So I was able to sort of take the leap of faith to say that this is something I was going to be passionate about, well in advance of anybody understanding laser in the US. And then, slowly over a period of about 5 years, sort of built up this concept and then decided to open up the first franchise, the laser distributor. Then actually the first center then came to me and said, we'd like to franchise this at the national level. And it's been a little bit of a whirlwind. Anybody that tells you it's easy to start a new business, they're lying. Okay. There's no playbook. There's as many mistakes as there are successes. We had a pandemic, which didn't really bode well for our franchise success,
Right.
but we've come out strong. We now have 13 centers open. We just signed up another 15 centers over the last 3 weeks. Our national expansion is doing fantastic. The American Academy of Orthopedic Surgery and now the Centers for Disease Control both recommend laser for the treatment of inflammation and pain. So we're very excited about that premise as it moves forwards. And anybody that's going to be at the OSEP meeting tomorrow through Saturday, our booth will be there. I'm an exhibitor as well as an attendee and as well as a presenter. So we're more than happy to share that. But it's a great story, and we're really happy to be able to have that option for our patients.
Well, the timing couldn't be better. I'm in episode 2 of Dope Sick, watching that
Yes.
right now, and it's wow, what a story. I mean, for those of you listening, if you're physicians, you're probably much more familiar in this than I was, although just being someone in society, of course, I know about it. But this there's a book out there, and I can't remember the title of the book that goes through the whole thing with Purdue, and then this scripted TV show. So it's not a documentary, but it's pretty powerful, even in the first couple episodes.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of the specialty of the physicians that are listening to your program, I think we can all agree on one thing, and that is every single day we're asked to do more and we're getting paid less.
Right.
So, it's not like, the days of being this relaxed, physician, you're overpaid, you're underworked, life is good. But, right now we're overworked tremendously and we're getting, ratcheted down. So the ortho laser centers in particular are a wonderful alternative revenue source for physicians because it is a patient pay model. You're also helping your patients because you're providing them an opioid alternative for treatment, and you're really providing a service to your community. So it's been a real great win for our franchise owners as well as the patients that have had the opportunity to be treated.
It makes sense. It's a win-win. So I want to get to in a couple minutes some of the cool stuff you're doing, but not that this isn't cool, but it's a little more. It's not as fun, I would imagine. But one thing you did mention we were communicating was an idea of an orthopedic mutual fund. So tell me about that. That was interesting. Kind of our area in some ways, but tell me what you're thinking there, or what's going on in your lab in terms of.
Well, yeah, I mean, here's the brain power. I mean, I was talking to Dana Jacoby about this, and I know you know Dana very well.
She's been on for those listening. Yep.
Yep. And so she's sort of the queen of orthopedic private equity events happening around the country right now.
Yep.
She's a tremendous influencer. But Dana and I were talking, and as you develop your relationships across industry, you're privy to a lot of information, and then you have expertise in that area as well. And so your expertise then allows you in sort of adjacent ability to identify innovation. And then, is it small innovation or is it disruptive innovation? So you're privileged to have information about what's happening around you with the companies that seek you out. Like when I go on the floor tomorrow at OSET, in front of all of those, exhibitors that are there, I'll be approached probably by about another 15 companies about potentially developing a relationship or identifying their technology. So you take that information, and then I'm an expert in that area, right? And then if I bring in one or two of my other colleagues that have that similar expertise, we then develop into, a grouping, if you will, and then we identify these early companies or startups or identifying technology within the larger companies that we can say is disruptive or really will change the game. Can we then identify, and will people want to join us in using our expertise as an advisor, if you will, within that space? And so that's sort of it's just an idea in the sky right now because, as you know, Dave, I don't have enough things going on in my life that, I can't start up something else. But I hope my wife's not listening. But it is a concept and an idea that I would really consider doing. I mean, taking advantage of 25 to 30 years of lifetime experience. You're a master. People want to talk to you. So it's kind of a cool idea.
Yeah. I agree. We'll keep us posted on that when we get you on for episode 2.
Sure.
You're another guest appearance. So now let's get to some of some of the cool stuff. Obviously, I'm a podcaster, so I think it's cool, right? I started to do this 3 years ago, and I didn't need to. Business is great and everything, but I like doing it. I like talking to smart people, and I think it helps people. So it's fun for me. So you've got your Ortho Show podcast. Tell us about that, and then your social media, the Follow the Fro, hashtag. What got you to start it? And, what do you like about it? And, just tell your other docs what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, in March of 2020, the world didn't need an orthopedic sports medicine specialist, right?
For the first time.
Right, for the first time in forever,
sports.
There was a recession in medicine, which was never supposed to happen, right? So we're on the sideline for 8 to 10 weeks. And long story short, I was a guest on this podcast called The Ortho Show. And because of my social media following, it was very well received and one of their more listened to episodes. And then the pandemic hits and they said, hey, we have this novel idea. Why don't you come on as a guest podcast host for like 10 episodes and let's see how it goes. and we never look back. It's
Yeah.
145 episodes at this point. And just like you said, it's a labor of love. I mean, every single time I have a guest on and I spend 30 minutes with them, I learn something from them. It elevates my game. It's just, and it's amazing. We really keep it entertaining. I don't want to be bored. People listen on podcasts. It can't be technical. I
Right.
always say, listen, my mother, Judy, is listening. Okay. So whatever
Yeah.
you're going to be saying, she has to understand it. And so we
Pretty
dial
cool.
it down to real basics, entertaining, fun stuff, and we get people laughing. We tell great stories, and it's become popular. It's even monetized a little bit now. We actually have, sponsorship, 2 sponsors per episode at this point, and there is some interest in a larger podcast grouping that we may take it to another level. So it's become what was still a labor of love and still a passion, but yet now it's a business. It's kind of
Right.
cool.
Yeah. I noticed that. And that's great. I think terrific. And you'll keep me posted. I hope to, as we talked about, be on your podcast too. So what about, you had the social media following, it sounds like, before. That was just something fun to do in the office. I mean, it gets back to your idea of branding, gets back to your idea of like patient demand and being known. I mean, obviously we have a lot of docs in the, in cosmetics. We have a lot of plastics, a lot of derms, a lot of, cosmetic, and they are all over this, right? I mean, this is their lifeblood. This is the key to their practice, but orthopedics, not as much, but obviously you're in the forefront of that. So tell us how you got involved in that piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Michael Ast had brought up about branding, I think is so important, and that's really what it came from. But social media came from my wife. She's kind of a big deal, and so she's an influencer. She has over 50,000 followers across multiple different social medias, and her book. I gotta give her
Plug it. Go
a
ahead.
shout out to plug her book right now.
Yeah.
French Blooms. It's on Amazon. It's a Rizzoli book. It's going to be absolutely gorgeous from her time in France as the lead ice skater for European ice capades in her 20s, and her love for flowers. And so it's a wonderful story. And then it also shows her amazing ability to do flower arrangements. And she's like, look, this is where it's at, Scott. Like, why are you not doing this? I mean, you've got, a lot of people, you travel a lot, you do a lot of education. Why don't you tell everybody about it? And so, we're actually transitioning that into a master brand class that I'm doing with Matthew Ray Scott, who's another big time influencer on LinkedIn, a dear friend of mine. And we're going to develop a class specifically for physicians to try and educate them on the ways in which you can do these things, right? What is your brand? What is your message? What do you want it to be? I'm an academic star. I travel the world to educate people, or I want to educate patients at a ground level. This is how we do things. This is what you're going to expect. Or is it that you want to be connected with research? I mean, so whatever it is, whatever gets you excited, you should then develop that message and make it part of your brand. The hashtag follow the fro was sort of this, sort of a joke as it went through. I do have a large, gray fro at this point right now, but it's taken on a life of its own. I mean, I literally walk into these meetings and like, hey, fro, it's like, and so, I enjoy that because it makes me connected. It takes me out of the small village of North Chelmsford, Massachusetts, and the small population of patients that I care for. And it gets me to an entire world of people that I can be associated with. And then a lot of the things that I do are educational within the opioid sparing world. So, I mean, the social media platform has allowed me to educate doctors to do things in a unique way that are going to help patients that I never meet. So you can scale your medical beliefs and how you do things and be able to help people across the world. It's really kind of cool.
So I want to wrap up with, one question that our listeners will know. I try to ask every doc who comes on, what's the one thing that you would either tell a young physician, okay, which I'm sure you deal with, but also think about, if you had a time machine, what would you tell the young Scott coming out now that you've, learned all these things? What's a lesson or two that you want to talk, something related to business or finances?
So I would say for the young doctors, you cannot start too early to figure out your messaging and your branding. Because if you do that, that accelerates your practice, that gets you to financial success. And then you're going to have conversations with Dave Mandell to be able to tell you how you're going to get even more successful. So start early. You cannot start too early. Now, if I was talking to the early fro, Scott Sigman, back in the day, what I would say is get started early in developing relationships outside of your local network. So start early on. Is it going to be through internet? Is it through societies, the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgery, whatever it is for your specialty? but get in, be members of committees, get to develop relationships with other people. It elevates your stature as to who you are in the larger community. It then will translate all the way down to your local community as you're the guy that's really out, or gal that's out there, that's thinking differently and wanting to, expand the local environment.
I love it. And of all the docs we've had, I think certainly Michael, as mentioned Brandy, but I think yours pretty unique. I mean, I think those are the networking piece. It's not something they teach in medical school, right? I mean, they do in business school. I'll tell you, not even in law school. Law school, you go to law school, it's all about learning the law or whatever that is, and being ready for, a legal practice. But in business school, it's a lot about teamwork and networking and building your, connections. And I've had other people say, listen, I don't need to be an expert in X. I just need to know an expert in X. And if I have enough of those experts and people who are connected, then it opens up all my opportunities in places I didn't think I might not have it otherwise. So, Scott, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you taking the time to being on. We'll definitely have you on again because I know we talk in another year. You'll have a lot of good stuff happening. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Oh, Dave, it's a pleasure to be here, man. Life is all about relationships. I love your story. Love the podcast. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. And for everybody listening, thank you for tuning in. We'll have another episode in this schedule in 3 weeks. Normally we're 2 weeks, but we're going to be out 3 weeks so you can have a listen over Thanksgiving weekend when many of you may have some time. So feel free to check back. We've got a great episode over Thanksgiving weekend. And as I always mention, if you are a physician and you have an interesting story or some cool things that you think your fellow docs would like to hear about, we'd love to have you on. So we're always looking for new guests. So reach out if you can. Thank you very much. And look for me in again 3 weeks. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. The Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast is brought to you by OJM Group, a multidisciplinary wealth management firm dedicated to helping physicians build and preserve their wealth while reducing taxes. Podcast listeners can get a free copy of our newest book. Simply text WPPOD to 844-418-1212 and click the link in the reply text to request your free print copy or ebook download. Be sure to join David for the next episode of the podcast. It's important to note that this content is for informational purposes only and does not represent personalized investment advice, as the information may not be suitable for your personal circumstances. Please contact your investment advisor before implementing any of the strategies discussed.